Welcome and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Handle with Care, Preserving Your Book and Paper Collections. I am Euclid Rosales Yuxi, Library Technical Assistant at the Preservation and Conservation Laboratory, Heritage Library Division, NALIS. Please note that a webinar resource document of all links and references shared in this session will be emailed to you after the webinar. You are also invited to submit your questions for the question and answer segment at the end of this webinar. Let me introduce today's facilitator, Danielle Fraser. Danielle has been the library conservator and head of the PAC Lab since 2009. Danielle holds a Master of Science in Information Studies and a Certificate of Advanced Studies in Conservation of Library and Archival Materials from the University of Texas at Austin. She was a Conservation Fellow of the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. She has been a member of the American Institute for Conservation and the Library Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Danielle enjoyed presenting papers at meetings of ACURIL, CORAL, and IFLA, so I know she's excited to present today. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you, Euclid. Before we get into our topic, let me introduce our organization. The National Library and Information System Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, NALIS, is the country's coordinator of all library and information services. Beyond the Heritage Library, there are 20 public libraries, 6 co-located community libraries, 5 libraries in correctional institutions, libraries in secondary and primary schools, and special libraries in several government agencies, all administered by NALIS. Please visit our website, www.nalis.gov.tt, for more information about our services. Follow NALIS on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. One of NALIS's key responsibilities is to promote and preserve national heritage information. The Heritage Library Division, located on the second floor of the National Library Building, Port of Spain, Trinidad, helps NALIS fulfill the goal of acquiring, promoting, and preserving national heritage information. Special collections acquired or donated to the Heritage Library Division consist of mainly traditional library items created by or of interest to a significant person or organization of Trinidad and Tobago. I invite you to follow the Heritage Library Division on Facebook at NALIS HLDTT. Remember, the reason we preserve these collections at the Heritage Library is to provide you with access to rich resources. Whether you are a high schooler seeking reliable sources for your school-based assessments or a tertiary level student refining your thesis or dissertation, the Heritage Library is here to help. Visit us to access books, reference materials, online resources, quiet study spaces, and guidance to help you find credible information and develop strong research habits that support your academic excellence. The Heritage Library hours are Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturdays, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. The Preservation and Conservation Laboratory is responsible for ensuring the overall longevity of library materials, with attention to the Heritage Library Division and its collection of historical importance. The PAC Lab, which was officially commissioned in 2013, helps NALIS fulfill its role as the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, Preservation and Conservation, or IFLA PAC, Regional Center for the English-Speaking Caribbean. NALIS is a part of a network of 16 IFLA PAC centers around the globe with the aim of providing knowledge and expert advice on preservation and conservation practices within their region and to serve as IFLA's key area of work on safeguarding and promoting culture and heritage. We've continued our mission of raising awareness of preservation and conservation issues through our Preservation Webinar Series. In case you missed any of our previous webinars or our previous seasons of the series, we'll share the link to the NALIS YouTube playlist with you. Photographs are more than just images. They are treasured connections to personal, family, and in this case, national history. Photos capture milestones, they capture events, they capture traditions in a way that no other medium is able to do. Now, from left to right are photos from the Central Library collection, now safeguarded by the Heritage Library Division. The Central Library Service was introduced in 1949 and was one of the three precursors to NALIS, which was established in 1998. Now, in the first photo, we see some young girls gathered at a bookmobile. There in the second photo is Dr. Eric Williams, the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, finishing a tour of a branch of the Central Library. And the third photo captures two young patrons immersed in a book at the Central Library. Now, for our families, photos are irreplaceable keepsakes, helping to preserve memories across generations. They are what help to provide a tangible link to loved ones and experiences that might otherwise fade with time. And so we understand the importance when we say handle with care. So I have one question for you, and in the chat, in the chat, you can answer very quickly. What are your interests as it relates to photos? What brought you to this webinar? So I'd like you to write in, are you here as a family archivist or the historian? Are you interested in preserving your family photos? Are you seeking to preserve the photographs in a library or an archive or the organization or the workplace where you currently are working or employed? Or perhaps you might be a professional photographer. Great. I mean, so we're seeing a number of persons saying that, yes, there's that interest to have information as it relates to family photographs. Thank you. And of course, persons are working at their university, at their library, at their archive, some hoping to help their customers. Wonderful. So we see that there's definitely an interest in safeguarding and preserving our photo collections. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at some key areas as they relate to how we go about handling and caring for our photographs. These things impact their long-term preservation. So the very first thing we'll look at is the structure of photographs and how that impacts deterioration. Next, we look at the environment and how the environment also plays a major role. Next, we look at use and handling. How can we help photographs last longer? Next, we'll consider some techniques to safely store photographs. Next, finally, we'll take a look at how photographs should be displayed safely. Photographs are visual, they are visual medium. And so their display and their showcase is central to how we enjoy them. So we're going to look at how to do that safely. Next slide, please. Now, photographs are more complex in structure, yet more vulnerable than you would expect. They are composite objects consisting of several layers, each with a different function. So if we think of a sandwich, and we've cut right through it in order to see a cross-section of a photo, here's what we're going to look at. Next, the basic components. The first one is the support or the base. Next, we have image-forming substance. Next, we have the emulsion or the binder. Now, this is a real oversimplification. And of course, there are exceptions based on the photographic process. So let me tell you a bit more. Next slide. The support or base, as we see for most photographs, is usually either next paper or film. But photographs have been developed on metals, glass, leather, and even silk. The photographic process has been very experimental over the years. Next slide. The image-forming substance are particles which absorb or scatter light to help create the image that we see in the photograph. These can be silver salts, iron, platinum, palladium, and for colored photographs, they are either pigments or dyes. And it all depends on the type of photo and how it was developed. Next, we look at the emulsion or binder. And this is the transparent material that holds the image particles in place. The material could be albumin, collodion, which is cellulose nitrate, or gelatin. Now, in almost all modern photographs, a highly purified gelatin has been used as the emulsion layer. And this layer is typically what will give glossy photos that very shiny finish that we're used to when we think of a photograph. Next slide. So if you are interested in learning more about the types of photographic processes, boy, I have a resource for you, the Graphics Atlas. It was created by the Image Permanence Institute, and they offer an amazing virtual study of collection of prints and photographs from the earliest types of experimentation all the way now to what we have as our digital prints. We will include this link in the resource document after the webinar, but it's quite a good one for learning and exploring. Now, here are some of the common types of deterioration you may see with your photographs. Let's start at the top with the binder. The binder itself may flake or lift off the surface of the photo as the binder expands or contracts when you have fluctuations in relative humidity. This layer, because it's gelatin, is often attacked by insects like cockroaches or silverfish, which may leave behind grooves or holes as they feed on the protein in the binder. Now, in the image-forming substance, if it's silver or metal compound, it can undergo tarnishing or oxidization from exposure to high levels of relative humidity and pollution. Now, this degradation results in a color change or fading, and oftentimes something called silver mirroring of the image. Now, in color photographs, the dyes of the image-forming substance may fade due to the effect of temperature, relative humidity, and light. Unfortunately, not all the colors fade at an even rate, and so we get a distinction in how the photograph looks. The support or the base at the bottom can undergo physical changes like cracks or tears, or even stretching if it's plastic base. You may also see stains or spots on this layer of the photograph. Let me show you some examples as we have from our collection. These are some visual examples of that deterioration that I mentioned. So the very first photo shows that silver mirroring. You see a bit in that very dark area, there's almost like a shine, a silver, like a mirror. And so it's called silver mirroring, where we have that deterioration of the image forming substance. The photo at the top in the white areas shows damage that was caused by insects. They have eaten off the very top layer of the photograph, leaving behind just the white base underneath. The bottom photo has significant cracks or breaks, and it has some losses as well. And this is the back of a photograph. And in the photo that has the spots, you can actually see some brown spots on some of the faces. And that's actually on the back of the photograph, but it's very visible through the front of the photograph as well. And the photograph on the bottom right, it shows that fading that I mentioned of the colored components of most colored photographs. The fading has happened very unevenly, and so the overall photo has a very pinkish hue overall. Now, just very quickly in the chat, I'd like you to tell me, have you ever seen deterioration like this in your photos? In your collection? Are you able to name any of these that you have actually seen in your photographs? Have you seen silver mirroring? Have you seen breaks? Do you see insect damage? Have you seen spots or stains? Or have any of your colored photographs faded? Yes, we're seeing a lot of you are experiencing or have experienced some of these issues, spots and fading. Yes, a lot of fading, folks seeing the insect damage, breaks and tears. Yes, all of the above, one person says. And yes, these are a lot of the common things that we see with respect to photographs. And it shows just how, even though they're a complex object, photos are very vulnerable to a lot of damage. And so environment plays an important role. So let's take a look at that. We are going to look at these factors in particular: relative humidity, temperature, air pollution, and light, and how they impact the deterioration that goes on with your photos. Now, here's how incorrect temperature and relative humidity can harm your photographic collections. If your temperature is very high, over 23 degrees Celsius, and the RH is 60%, it increases that deterioration. It accelerates the natural aging that goes on with photographs. In fact, that very high relative humidity softens up the gelatin, which can become very sticky, and you can end up with that gelatin sticking to other things. And of course, as we know, high relative humidity and warm temperatures can encourage mold growth as well. But we don't ever want to get it down to very, very dry. Photos don't deal well with any relative humidity that's under 15%. We end up seeing cracking, peeling away of the emulsion, and embrittlement of the paper, etc. And then if we were to fluctuate between high temperatures, high relative humidities, and low temperatures, low relative humidities, and we have a constant fluctuation that moves more than a 10-unit change, that encourages an expansion and a contraction at different rates. Because the components are all different, they're going to behave differently and react differently to the different conditions. And so sometimes we get an instability or even a separation between the components of the photos. And so what do? We want to keep photos as cool and as dry as we can. Optimally, for photographs, it's agreed that RH that is lower than 50% would be the ideal. However, I would say if we can get something that is stable, no matter the figure, without much fluctuation of plus or minus 5% RH, we can be good with respect to our photographs. We, of course, don't want it to be very humid, but as low as we can get it, as dry as we can get it would be good. And for black and white prints, they are really very vulnerable to high temperatures. So it's encouraged that we store black and white prints in temperatures lower than 20 degrees Celsius. And again, that we don't have those fluctuations. Now, if we are dealing with negatives, right? Negatives technically are smaller versions of the photographs that are printed on a plastic. We often don't see them nowadays because we're dealing with digital prints. But let's say you have negatives as part of your collection. And sometimes when the photos are lost, the negatives are the only way you can get back a copy to be developed or even to be scanned or digitized. And so negatives, it's important to have them be stored in even colder temperatures than that 20 degrees Celsius if we are trying to store them for the long term. And now negatives, transparencies, color photographs, especially if you have a lot of them in a collection, in an institutional collection, you may want to consider removing them from the rest of your library materials and considering some cool or cold storage exclusively for the photographs. That ensures that those photographs, especially the negatives, the transparencies, the color photographs, which are very susceptible to high temperature, high relative humidity, are stored away and stored as best as possible in somewhere cool or cold. Now, as it relates to pollutants, photographs are actually very vulnerable in the sense that pollutants in the air can actually cause certain reactions to happen, which cause photographs to fade, to become stained, and to degrade. Pollutants that we don't necessarily see. So I'm not talking Sahara dust or smoke. I'm talking things like ozone, peroxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur components. And a lot of times the sources for those might be industrial areas, factory settings. We may even introduce them inside by bringing in certain paints and varnishing. If we have new wooden structures, very new wood cupboards, etc., those tend to off-gas some of these chemicals that could be damaging. So we want to be sure that we are ensuring that our air is well circulated, that it's filtered, that we're getting as fresh air as possible, because that pollution can actually cause, particularly the black and white photographs that are made with the silver compounds, those can become oxidized. You can get that silver mirroring. They can become very yellow. You may get a lot of spotting on the paper, etc., just off of the pollutants that are within the air. And for light or UV, am I talking both visible light as well as ultraviolet light can cause damaging reactions within your photographs. Color prints and other light-sensitive items fade in the presence of light as well as ultraviolet light. And the one issue with light damage is that it's irreversible. There's nothing we can do in order to restore what has been faded. And so it's important that you carry out some prevention, that you reduce the amount of light in the room that you may have photographs stored, that you consider enclosures. And we're going to touch a little bit about enclosures as we move along in this webinar. Next slide. So given the composite nature of photographs, the treatment of options are usually very complex and limited. And therefore, we can better prolong the life of a photograph through good preservation practices. Prevention, much easier than the cure. And so we'll touch on a couple of things that we need to remember when we are actually physically handling photographs. It is recommended that you use gloves or very clean hands when handling photographs. And use both hands to hold the photographs by the edges. Avoid touching the image surface of the photograph. And this is important. Here we have an example on the right where the image is now completely obscured by the photographs that have been, by the fingerprints that have been left behind over time. And the fingerprints may not have been initially visible when the person first touched them, but the oils and the various things reacted over time with the photograph, where we're at a point now we cannot even see the image that was photographed in the item. And so it's really important to take this precaution to use your gloves when you're handling photographs. And I trust that it's understood that we ought not to be eating, drinking, or smoking near our photographs or near any of our collections that we want to care for as long as possible. And we want to reduce handling the originals. Try to use a copy or a surrogate whenever it's possible. Sometimes it's good enough to have a copy of the photo on display or the copy to be the one that's handled by many people while we store away the original. And be sure to look at your photograph before you pick it up. You may not see without observing and taking a look issues that could be worsened by you handling it and moving it around. So take a look. Be sure to be alert for clues that might tell you of the condition, that might tell you of certain tears or issues, etc. And do not use paper clips, staples, or rubber bands with your photographs. Those can adhere to the photograph and be problematic when you're trying to remove them. Now, record as little as possible on the photo itself. We encourage you to use HB pencils. Lightly label the back of the photo in the margin area. Inks or adhesive labels can become acidic and bleed into the photograph. And we see a printed label that was stuck to a photograph at the base here. And you see how very brown it has become. That's a sign of the acidity of the paper. It's degraded. It's releasing its acidic components as it degrades, and those could potentially affect the photograph. Whenever you need to use or handle a photograph, we want to be sure that you're using full support. Do not have photographs bend or hang down as you handle them. That could cause breaks or tears. And we're going to talk now about enclosures, because we can very easily place a physical barrier to protect photographs from dust, light, or other harmful environmental conditions. A protective enclosure, such as an envelope or a sleeve or a folder or an album or a matting or frame or box, all of these provide that first protective layer in direct contact with the photograph. And there's so many different types of protective enclosures, and selecting the appropriate ones for photographs is an important decision. So let me touch on a couple of things that are going to be of importance. You should follow the international standards for storage materials for photographic items. The general specifications for this material should be that they are chemically inert or resistant to deterioration and should not cause harm to the photographs as they age. Also, they should provide good physical protection and support to the photographs. These materials should also pass the PAT test to be considered photo safe. So when we say photo safe materials, we're referring to materials that have passed the photographic activity test, which is an ISO standard in of itself. It is an accelerated aging test carried out to determine if an enclosure would cause chemical reactions in the components of a photograph. And so here's what we look for as it relates to paper and board. We want it to be acid-free. That is a pH of 7.2 to 10. It ought not to have any sulfur content, no post-consumer recycled materials. It needs to be free of lignin, pH buffers, metal particles, acids, peroxide, and anything else that can cause harm to your photograph. And for plastics to be considered PAT tested, they ought to be free of plasticizers. This means no PVC, cellulose nitrate, or cellulose acetate, or anything that's plasticized. No damaging content. It should be uncoated without any layers or glazing on it. And some of the best plastic recommended would be polyester, polypropylene, polyethylene, and polystyrene. These are all generally good. Now, just to show you an example of an album that has been used now with this same Central Library Service collection, the album itself has pages that are covered in polyester. The backing of each photo is one that is acid-free material. So the album itself allows you to have the photograph stored in a safe manner. Now, when we consider where do we get materials from, that's what this slide has listed for you. I want to mention that this list of suppliers of preservation materials is neither exhaustive, nor is it an endorsement. We are not endorsing any of these, we're just providing the information. Gaylord Archival is the only one that has a local supplier by way of ECCA School and Office Supplies Limited. There's also Archival Products, Hollinger Metal Edge, University Products, TALIS, Conservation Resources International in the UK, and Preservation Equipment. Again, not an endorsement, it's not an exhaustive list, but just a list of some suppliers that are able to provide preservation materials should you be looking into acquiring things that would help with the storage of your photographs. Now, here is the danger of not using a preservation quality enclosure. Your photographs may become stuck. How many of you have these magnetic albums at home? If you have family pictures from the 1970s to the 1980s, chances are they are in an album just like this one. Those once popular photo albums with the sticky pages can be very damaging to photographs. Often, the adhesive deteriorates and it stains the photos. You actually see lines at the back of the photo, and sometimes it becomes very difficult to remove. I would like to share a photograph of, a video. Permit me just so I am sharing with you a video. Thank you. So you would have seen in that video, and it's one that, of course, we will share the link in our resources. It's one that shows me removing photographs of me as a child from a family album, similar to the one that I show in the slide here. First, we use a polyester strip, laying it low and just using a sawing method back and forth. And one item that worked really well was actually unwaxed floss. Yes, dental floss was perfect for sliding right between the photograph and the adhesive and helping to cut that adhesive in order to unstick the photo. You let me know if you have some success with doing that with those albums. But if we are displaying them, we want to display photographs for a period of 3 to 6 months. And again, the lighting should be at a maximum. If you have something to measure, 50 lux for very sensitive materials. We don't want photographs in direct sunlight or in direct UV light. And ideally, photographs that are going to be put on display should be framed. And here are some considerations for framing your photographs. In this image on screen, just back to one slide, please, to show the, right, thank you. In this image on screen, you see at the front, the frame and the glass. And right behind that is what is called a mat board. It's passe part out, right? A mat window. And behind that is the photograph. Behind the photograph, an acid-free board. Sometimes what happens with framing is that the front window is left out and the photograph ends up being stuck to the glass of the frame. Or sometimes they put the photograph directly on a board at the back that is not acid-free. And those acids transfer into the photograph and are sometimes visible on the front of the photograph. And so we really want to be sure that the sandwich that we are using on the inside of our frame is one that has acid-free window at the front, just to separate the photograph from the glass, and then at the back, an acid-free board to provide good support of the item. We want to be sure that the materials that are actually touching and are in direct contact with our photograph are in fact photo safe. And looking at mounting and matting, it's important that we use that quality mat board. You can explore options for creating your own mat, and we're going to send you some resources that include not just instructions, but also some considerations with respect to the mat board, as well as how we go about with the attachments. What we have found to be rather easy to do is to have our own photo corners created. So rather than sticking the photo down to the back of the mat board with any adhesive or tape, we use photo corners that allow the photo to be placed directly into the corner and to be held that way for display. It means at the end of us displaying it, or if we have to move it out of the mat or the frame, the photo itself can just easily be slipped out of the corners, right? So no damage is happening there. So we are now at the end of our webinar. I want to be sure to remind you to join us in July, July 22nd, 11 a.m. local time for Preserving Art. I am so excited to welcome Joelle Salke, conservator at the National Gallery of Jamaica, and she will share some of the techniques for the handling, transportation, display, cleaning, and long-term storage of artwork. So whether you have pieces that are on canvas, paper, or wood, this free webinar will equip you with the knowledge to protect them from damage and to preserve them for years to come. You do not want to miss this webinar. I hope that you have registered. And so now we take the questions. I am about to see if there are any questions in the Q&A. No problem if you haven't added them there. We'll also explore questions that may have been added to the chat. Questions in the Q&A pop up immediately and are easy to find, as opposed to sometimes in the chat. It ends up being a little bit more difficult. So we are going into the chat. We thank you so much for your participation and your questions. Excellent. I see a question. Okay, so someone asks, what if you spray a tin of insecticide in the vicinity of a photo album on the coffee table? Is that harmful? Potentially, but we're hoping that the enclosure of the photo album is one that is able to protect the photographs. So it gives that buffer, it gives that enclosed area around the photographs directly. So the photos should be protected from what's going on in the environment. Of course, be sure to not apply any chemicals directly to your photographs or your albums. This can cause some long-term damage. We may not see it immediately, but down the road, you may see some impact from that chemical being sprayed directly to the photographs. But again, if it's in a photo album, secured, closed, there's a possibility that we would have restricted some of that potential damage. One question in the chat, what advice would you give on how to deal with dust? We have a wonderful webinar on dealing with dust that was done. We, of course, will be sure to include the link in our resource. But for photographs, it's a little bit different. Remember, photographs have that glossy gelatin layer, most of them. And so it's important for us to be sure that we are not wiping the surface of the photograph. That can actually cause tears on the surface of the photograph. So it's actually better to consider using an air duster. Those are canisters that have compressed air in it, and those can actually help you remove remove the dust off of the surface of the photograph, right? So the image side, that glossy side of the photograph, we do not want to wipe directly with anything. That can cause scratches and damage the surface of the photograph. It's better if we use compressed air, a canister of compressed air, in order to help remove that dust that's directly on photographs. Okay, so I am going to the Q&A. One question says, what type of gloves should be used when handling photos? What you would have seen us using were regular vinyl gloves, or sorry, it just popped up in my head. The regular type of plastic gloves, sometimes it end up being nitrile. That's the name, nitrile gloves. Nitrile gloves are actually way better than the vinyl. However, you can also use cotton gloves. The cotton gloves tend to be a little bit softer, so there's less of a chance of maybe really scratching or doing too much damage to the surface of the photo as you are handling them. However, it's very important that even as you have on gloves, we still take the precaution of handling the photographs only on the edges, right? Never really hold or press or touch the image area of the photograph, even if you're wearing gloves. What would you do to repair a ripped photo? Yes, and unfortunately, that is one that requires a bit more of a complex treatment, one that should be carried out by someone who's trained to handle photographs. Because if you were to apply the regular things like we would for dealing with a rip in a page, it may not properly fix the issue. It may also bring further damage down the road. For instance, using any type of tape or any type of heat, etc., to apply, or even liquid, could cause some problems with respect to photographs. So if you do have a ripped photograph and you want to be cautious with respect to you trying to do the repair yourself, what you can do instead is to provide some support to that ripped photograph. Here's my recommendation to you. Provide a sheet of acid-free paper or board on the back of the photograph. That ensures that as the photograph is being handled, or as it's moved, or as it's just being dealt with, that you're moving it with something that is fully supporting the photograph. And then place that into a sleeve. A sleeve that is made of polyester would allow you to see the photograph without having to actually remove it from the enclosure. So if you needed to do any kind of copying or scanning, or if you needed to show it in any way, at least it is visible without having to handle it and possibly make that tear even worse. Next question. So if your picture is already stuck to the glass frame, how do you get it off without ripping it? Or is there no saving it? This is one that I know happens frequently, and the success of the removal varies. It really varies on just how stuck the item is. It varies on maybe even the techniques that are involved. One technique that has been recommended in the past, but I'm unable to test it myself, has been to use dry ice in order to cool down the glass of the frame so that you can break that sticking, that cohesion that has happened between the glass and the photo. The temperature change cools down the glass in a different way to how the photograph may be cooled down, and that allows it to become unstuck for a period of time. Again, I haven't tested it myself, so I'm really not sure if that is one that's going to be successful, but that's one that has been recommended in the past. This is why prevention is way better than a cure. Now, if you had a surrogate where you had a reprint of that photo or you had a duplicate of that photo and it wasn't an issue where it was stuck to the glass frame, you know that your original was okay, you could sacrifice that surrogate without an issue. One other thing that I mentioned as well was to be sure to use matting, a frame, a window mat on the inside of your glass frame to be sure that you have that spacing between the photograph and the glass of the frame. Right. So again, this is one of those scenarios where prevention ends up being better than a cure, because the cure we're really not sure as to how and what would be a good method of safely removing it. We have another question. Is there anywhere in Trinidad where negatives of film can still be developed? That's a really good question. And unfortunately, I'm not sure if a number of the photo studios are still doing that. I believe there ought to be one available, perhaps through our yellow pages online or in the print, calling around to see if photo studios actually do the development of negatives. It would be good to explore, right? So I would say a photo studio, a professional photo studio, seeing what can be done there. However, the alternative that has been used as of recently for a lot of negatives has been to do digitization. So what goes on is that you digitize it in a way with a machine that you set the issues, you put the settings on the machine for negatives. You know, negatives are kind of inverted, as in what is white shows up black, what is black shows up white. So you have that kind of reversal of color. And if you are digitizing, you have different settings that would make that switch, that would make that transition to show it as if it were a regular photograph. And so that may be an option, exploring perhaps the digitization of the negatives that would allow you to get a digital photograph that can then be printed. What do you suggest for those of us who have large amounts of old pictures stuck in albums? You will need to transition those photographs to an album that does not require them to be stuck, right? Those kind of albums that I mentioned, the ones that have the acid-free material, the polyester, etc., are good options. Now, getting them out of that album, perhaps using the methods that were highlighted in that video, using the polyester strip, or perhaps the unwaxed dental floss could be good options. Now, if those seem to not work, you may have to sacrifice the album. And what I say by this is that you actually may have to cut around the photograph and in order to get it out of the album itself, right? Once you get it out, It's then a matter of flipping it over and perhaps peeling off that sacrificed album page, bit by bit, layer by layer, carefully from the back of the album. We had a collection that had that very same issue, and some of the photographs were not coming up as easily using the methods of the polyester strip or the unwaxed dental floss. And so that's what we had to do. We had to make the decision to sacrifice the album. The album actually had some insect damage as well, so it was not necessarily in a good condition in any case. It wasn't one that we were going to save, but we were able to then sacrifice the pages, and then working from the back of the photograph, we were able to very, very carefully, manually tear away and remove the layers of the album page. And that may have to be the point that you come to with respect to some of the photographs that are stuck in old albums. Should negatives be stored at the same temperature as photographs? Negatives, colored photographs, and transparencies should all be stored at an even colder temperature than you would for black and white photographs. Those are very sensitive as it relates to temperature, as it relates to relative humidity. And so cold storage is what is recommended for negatives. As with anything, you ought to store like with like. So it means separating your negatives from your colored photographs, from your colored transparencies, etc. You want to keep them separated in that storage, whichever form of storage you opted to have for the items. But yes, negatives, colored photographs, as well as transparencies, ought to be in what is considered cool or cold storage. Question, what is the best way to store several photographs that are not framed? Wonderful question. An album, ideally, would be one of these ways. But if you're not that very interested in displaying the photos, to have someone flip through pages of an album to view them, but you're really just looking at storing them, a photo box would be one of the options. Photos can be placed into sleeves or envelopes and then stored standing up inside of a photo box, a box that is made of acid-free material, made to the size of the photographs to allow you to store all of them together, stacked up. Now, remember, the reason I'm telling you to put them in sleeves or at least interleave between the photographs. Interleaving refers to putting some acid-free photo-safe paper in between each photograph, is that photographs could potentially get stuck to the back of another photograph if they are just stacked up without any protection like that. And so we want to be sure that we have our photographs well separated if we are storing them in the long term. And let me just get to my last question. It says here, can you repeat the storage temperature, lux, and relative humidity for black and white heritage photos? Great question. So particularly for black and white photographs, we want cold storage. It ought to be RH that is less than 50%, not cycling more than +5, plus or -5. And the temperature needs to be even colder than 20 degrees Celsius, right? For our colored prints and negatives. For black and white photos, anywhere around 20 should be good, but even colder for colored prints and negatives. And the lux, as I mentioned, maximum lux for all photographs will be 50 lux. That's going to be the maximum that you should have for all photographs. Someone asks, are photo books that can be ordered online where the photo is printed directly on the page a good solution for storage or alternative to albums? Yes, because that ends up being a surrogate. So rather than persons handling or dealing with the original photographs, they get to enjoy a photo book where you have compiled the photos in a story-like order. You have all your captions. They don't have to flip over on the back to see what is written on the back. Who is this in the photo? There's none of that handling that needs to go on. There's no need for you to write on the back of the photo because the photo books allow you to put in your own text, to put your own content, to put your own captioning, etc., to arrange the photographs as you would like them. That's a very good alternative. That's a very good surrogate to your original photographs. Thank you. And we are going to go back to the chat just to be sure that we have questions answered. All right, someone asked if I would give information on how to preserve digital photographs on the long term. Not exactly my forte, but I am including some information from the Library of Congress in the resource as it relates to digital photography. And definitely there's some things to be considered for that. It's a different ball game as it relates to dealing with the physical item versus dealing with the digital photographs. Digital photographs, like with all of your digital files, if you're scanning books, documents, if you have videos, if you have photographs, they all require preservation. A lot of times people think the preservation stops once I just digitize it and I have it there. But that continued access, that continued availability of the file is something that has to be ensured by you putting digital preservation techniques in place. And perhaps that's one that you can suggest as a webinar in the future that we'll take into consideration. Someone mentioned a studio on Trackgate Road in Woodbrook called One Studio. Okay. Thank you so much. Can you tell? Okay, great. I think I answered the question about how to store photographs together, having them separated well so that they're not going to get stuck to each other. Placing them upright in a box is always a good way. Someone asks, can you also use A4 paper between photos to store photographs in a box? It's not necessarily the size of paper that counts. I think A4 refers to that, but it's really about the quality of the paper, the manufacturing behind the sheet of paper that you're using. We want to be sure that this is paper that is acid-free, that it passes all the aspects as it relates to being photo-safe, that it doesn't have recycled components in it, that it is a pH that is acceptable to be considered acid-free, that it doesn't have dyes and colorants in it. There are a lot of things like that that you want to consider, but the photos themselves should be supported by paper that is sized maybe a little bit bigger than the photographs themselves, and that is what is best for storing in between your photographs. Someone asks, is there a special light bulb that should be used to display photos under? So with respect to display, I mentioned 50 lux as a range of brightness as it relates to having photos on display and having lights projected onto them. Lighting by sunlight or lighting by light bulbs. Now, when we refer to light bulbs, it's actually found that fluorescent lighting produces a high level of UV light compared to other types of light bulbs. And so you may want to just have some consideration for that. I know LED bulbs currently have way less UV light And I'm not sure about the lux level of LED bulbs, but those tend to allow you to adjust the levels accordingly, etc. So that may be a consideration for a display. Question, where can you get archival boxes in Trinidad and Tobago? And if we'll just go back to the slide that showed the suppliers, which is not an endorsement, neither is an exhaustive list. Gaylord Archival has ECCA, who are available locally as their authorized local suppliers. But of course, now we're doing quite a lot of shipping of our items personally in. So I've also provided a list of websites that take you to some reputable suppliers for archival boxes, archival sleeves, envelopes, all of albums, all those things that you would need can be found through any of these suppliers. Okay, I think we are at the end of our questions. Thank you so very much, everyone. Just a reminder, I am so excited about our next webinar in July. So be sure to register. I'm telling you, having an art conservator on board who is aware of Caribbean collections, the conditions that we have in the Caribbean as well, and who can guide us on that. Joelle brings a wealth of knowledge, having worked at the National Gallery of Jamaica. So you want to be sure to be a part of that webinar, whether you have artwork on paper, canvas, wood, you have acrylic, oil, whatever it is, you want to be a part of this webinar where she will break down all of the things that we can consider. And so I thank each and every one of you for your participation. Thank you so very much.